The next League of Legends Clash tournament is coming up soon, which gives me the perfect example to talk about something I've wanted to make a video on for a long time: how to play with the pre-made team. 5v5ing with friends is already fun, but what makes it even more fun is incorporating pro-level team play concepts into the mix, which is what this video is going to teach you. We'll go through each stage of the game, section by section, starting with draft, seen in a way that you've never even considered before, to early game fighting tips and mid-game sequence planning. In this video, I'll essentially teach you everything you need to know in order to get your pre-made team into shape for your next game night. And for you solo queue warriors out there, don't worry too much. More than half of what you're going to hear in this video is going to be useful to you even if you're not planning on playing with a team anytime soon. But for those of you who do want to do well and get those higher tier Clash rewards, well, you've come to the right place.
My name's Rogue and I played League of Legends professionally for 7 years. Now I'm a full-time content creator and coach for all ranks Iron through to Challenger. So if you want more information of what a coaching session with me will look like, you can find more information by following the link in the video description below.
And while you're in the description, you'll also find the link to my Patreon where I post all of the recordings of my best coaching sessions in full, with almost 1,000 hours of content currently available, all sorted by role and rank, including sessions where I've coached for professional level teams. You can get a glimpse of what pro level league looks like from the inside. That's why whatever you're looking for, you'll easily be able to find something that's going to help you improve, no matter your rank. Now, when I work with high-level teams, I often do their draft in a pretty unique way. I not only try to categorize different team compositions based on the composition's goal, but I also categorize them based on the archetype of their jungle champion. Here's an example of what I mean taken from some drafting tables I cooked up from a pro team I worked with a little over a year ago. You'll notice specifically that there are two entirely different draft tables for a dive composition, one with a farming jungler and one with a ganking jungler. This is due to something that I like to refer to as a demanding lane matchup. You see, some lane matchups simply demand more jungle attention than others. The most obvious example of this happens almost any time you see a significant range disparity. For example, when you have a melee versus range support matchup in bot lane. The win condition of these kind of matchups are very clear. In this lane, Alistar and Lucian don't have any kill threat at all until they get to a minimum of level 3, since they simply lack the damage necessary to go for an all-in. If they do try to go in, they will simply run out of damage before they can complete the kill because they're such a low level, and they will lose the trade massively on the way out, taking a ton of return damage as they retreat, while also losing push, putting them in a terrible situation. Therefore, the lane is incredibly hard early. The range side of the matchup will always dominate. They will by default get pushed since they can literally walk up and auto-attack the Alistar for free damage, and there is nothing he can do about it until he gets to that first breakpoint at level 3, where he finally gains enough damage to threaten a kill. If the range side of the matchup can poke down Lucian Alistar to be below half health or so before they're able to get level 3, this will entirely deny their ability to take that all-in timer, since you can't all-in when you're on 20% health. If this happens, it then traps the melee side of the matchup in a permanently losing situation, which they can only get out of by dropping minions and tower plates in order to recall, putting them significantly behind. On the other side though, the Lucian Alistar's goal is to simply conserve health until they can reach the breakpoint at level 3, at which their goal is to try and leverage the kill threat they now have into getting a recall, by either killing their opponent and recalling, or threatening an all-in that forces their opponent to concede push, allowing them to crash a wave into tower and recall for free. As the melee side, recalling is your primary objective in these kind of matchups. There are two ways to get a better all-in: level ups and items. The early levels suck because a level 1 Alistar Lucian with the Doran's Blade can't one-shot someone, so they can't go in. But a level 4 Lucian Alistar with a couple of longswords who just healed back to full HP by recalling, now that has a lot more kill threat. The same is true in other lanes. Just look at every single person who has picked Fizz with Ignite versus a mage in mid lane. What will Fizz with Ignite do at level 3? Well, he's going to take the earliest opportunity to go for an all-in, otherwise he's just going to sit around and get poked out until he's useless. Helping melee supports avoid these range versus melee matchups is actually one of the main reasons why pro teams would lane swap their bot lane to top at level 1 so often at the recent World Championship. In fact, in the first 38 games played at the recent World Championship, the team with the melee support always initiated a level 1 lane swap to top in order to avoid having to play the difficult early levels of a melee versus range support matchup. With the win conditions of these kind of matchups being so obvious, you can begin to see why jungle intervention is so important in these kind of lanes. Here's an example from a Gragas game I played taken from my Patreon in a game played about a year ago. Look at my bot lane's matchup. They're playing Xayah and Alistar, who are going to lose hard versus the double range bot lane until they can get to about level 3, which is the point where their champions spike. So I therefore path bot lane with the plan to arrive there as they get level 3, in order to facilitate that all-in and to make sure they can get the early recall they need before they're poked out by the double range bot lane. When I arrive bot, just as my bot lane gets level 3, Alistar is already poked down to half health, so the window is closing on when we'll be able to get them this breakout gank that they need. As the real purpose here is to facilitate the all-in, but ultimately to try and get my bot lane a recall, which is the win condition for their lane in this type of matchup. Therefore, just like in this example, junglers are incentivized to be there to facilitate the all-in window when playing with a melee side of a matchup like this, but they're also incentivized to go there in order to block the all-in window when playing with the range side of a matchup. Range vs melee matchups aren't the only example of demanding lanes that require jungle attention though. Any top laner who doesn't take teleport instantly creates a demanding lane as well, as a kill on a top laner who doesn't have TP has huge consequences when compared to a kill on one who does, who can just TP back and catch the wave like nothing happened. So again, junglers are incentivized to spend time in those lanes to either punish the enemy top for not taking TP as it grants an increased reward, or to protect their own top laner who didn't take TP. The same is true for certain types of champions who just simply create insane levels of volatility. Think of champions like Pyke, Blitzcrank, Riven, and Draven. Now this all leads back to those drafting tables we saw a few minutes ago, and something interesting you'll notice is that, for example, in the drafting table with a farming jungler, I specifically specify we can't play champions like Blitzcrank and Pyke, because that would instantly create one of those volatile matchups due to the nature of the champion, or possibly creating a range versus melee matchup. The same thing can be true if you look at the top laners. In the ganking jungler section, you can see some top laners that are ranged champions. You can see Volatile Riven, and you can see Vayne top lane is a possibility to be played. But then when you look at the farming jungler section, those champions don't exist anymore because farming junglers don't want to play with laners with volatile matchups like that. Farming junglers, for example Nocturne, want to do one simple thing for the first 7 to 8 minutes of the game. They want to hit jungle camps, in sequence, and that's it. Nocturne has incredibly weak early ganks, but the moment he hits level 6, he spikes immensely and the opportunity for ganks skyrocket. So Nocturne's playstyle revolves around him sequencing camps in order to maximize the amount of XP he can get up until he gets level 6, and then he'll finally join the game. So if you draft Nocturne, a farming jungler, with a no TP range top laner, a Fizz mid, and a bot lane who picked Blitzcrank into Caitlyn, you suddenly now have 3 demanding lanes that all require a ton of jungle attention. Yet Nocturne is a jungler who doesn't want to ever go to a lane until he has 6. This is the reason why I build my drafting tables with jungle champion archetypes in mind. A jungler playing Maokai, for example, is much more willing to skip camps occasionally in order to babysit a lane that needs attention. So in a draft where I see my teammates have picked 2 or more demanding lanes, I would always opt for picking a supportive style jungler like Maokai that will be more happy to skip camps in order to give his laner extra attention if they need it. While with a jungler like Nocturne, you might be better off picking something like Nami into Caitlyn, who can instead heal through the poke and hold her own better in the 2v2, unlike Blitzcrank, who is completely reliant on setting up ganks for a jungler that doesn't want to come. Now I'm going to leave things there in terms of talk about draft, since I already released an incredible video about a month ago that goes more into detail about drafting strategy, which you can check out to complement what you learned in this video in regards to team play drafting. Now let's move on to the early game. I'm about to say something that's going to make you think I'm a bit stupid. Are you ready? In early game fights, you should probably engage onto the enemy tank. Engaging on the tank goes against everything you've ever learned about team fighting, but here's the thing. Pre-1 item tank champions are not tanky yet. Being level 5 with 2 Reaper Crystals isn't the same thing as being a 3 item Ornn with 4k max health and 200 armor. When grouped up with 2 or more members, you generally have enough damage to one-shot almost any champion in the duration of crowd control, or at least come close to doing so. This gives an incredible advantage to the team that engages in most early game fights, unlike late game fights which are a little bit more nuanced. Most people make the common mistake of treating early game fights the same as late game ones, where they do everything possible to try to get to enemy carries who at this stage in the game don't even do much more damage than everyone else, rather than just one-shotting the closest target with the combined damage of their whole team. To see what I mean, just look at some early game LCK teamfights from the perspective of the person who was engaged upon. Here, closely watch the Naafiri and the Nautilus and take note of their ability usage this fight. They both deal essentially 0 damage, with every ability being used defensively. And in this fight, pay attention to the Xin Zhao. He doesn't even gain control of his character until he's on 10% health, at which point the only thing he can do is flash ult away and die anyway, again doing only minimal damage in the fight. Now watch the Varus in this fight. Even with a good flash, he only gains control of his character at half HP, and in the entire fight manages just 2 or 3 auto attacks of damage before he realizes his whole team is dead. Now let's rewatch all of these fights from the other perspective. Pay attention to Kai'Sa in this fight and look at how much she's free hitting with literally no risk to her. She's essentially able to free hit without any risk to her, fully stacking lethal tempo and going crazy. In this next one, look at Zeri. Same thing, she's just stacking her lethal tempo for free. And in this last one, keep an eye on Ezreal. He's just straight up vibing in the backline, using E to go forward and just dealing free damage as much as he wants. You can see by being the team that engages in early game fights, you allow your carries to free hit without fear, but the most important thing to note is that the damage they deal is far more valuable when compared to the damage that the enemy is returning onto our engages. Now this clip here is what inspired me to put this in a video. Now this was taken from a team coaching I did about 2-3 weeks ago, and it shows a team who obviously didn't understand the reason for why it's so advantaged to engage first in these early game fights. So right here we have a great opportunity to go in. Vi's charging Q, we got Poppy in a bush with Akali close to follow. Our team didn't take this engagement though, but why should they? Well, it's because if we engage first, our damage is just more valuable. If we, for example, send everything into the Jarvan, we Vi ult the Jarvan, we Vi Q the Jarvan, we put all of our damage, our Poppy charges in, and we just sink everything into him. That would probably make Jarvan die before he can press a button, or in a worst case scenario, drop him to 20% health, at which point he would flash and EQ away and basically deal no damage in the fight, even if he lives. But the counter to that is, aren't we ignoring the Taliyah? Couldn't she just counter-engage and do a ton of damage to us? Yeah, she probably could, but there is a massive difference in the value of the damage she deals. If we go in with Vi Poppy and use every ability on Jarvan, we have already used our cooldowns and had our impact in the fight. So if Taliyah exchanges her cooldowns to kill somebody who has already used every one of their spells, the value of that kill is substantially less than what we did to the Jarvan. We take the Jarvan out of the fight by killing him or forcing him out at 20% health before he can do a point of damage, and then Taliyah trades her cooldowns for a person who already has no cooldowns. And then after Taliyah burns her cooldowns, Akali comes in with fresh cooldowns and kills the Taliyah who doesn't have cooldowns. You can start to see the value for why engaging fast is so good. Now don't get confused here. I'm not telling you to always engage onto the ulting Alistar. Use common sense and still prioritize key targets if you can. The biggest takeaway you should take from this is pre-1 item, engaging first is almost universally better than being the team who gets engaged upon. Champions are squishy at this point in the game and can be one-shot in 1 to 2 seconds, dying with little to no impact in the preceding fight. Then kills traded back after the engage are traded back onto your team members who have already used their abilities, thus they are lower value kills in the context of who wins the fight. So next time you start up Void Grubs with your team, plan a turn quickly, and the moment you see that first enemy walk around a corner, turn hard, turn fast, and blow them up before they can even press a button. Now let's talk about the mid-game sequence planning to be exact. You can't play as a team if you don't make plans as a team, so how do we do that? Well, in a perfect world, try to synchronize your recall as much as you can as a team, resetting around the same time so you come out of base at the same time. At this point, every pro team does the same thing. They ask roughly the same questions in order to figure out what to do next. Number 1, what's the next objective and what side of the map are we playing for? The best way to do this is to look at either what objective is coming up next or what side of the map has more towers on that you can take. In this situation, there are 2 possible options. We already have the bot tier 2, so we could go top side where we can play for the top and mid tier 2 and even get the enemy's red buff that spawns in 1 minute. Or we could go bot side and set up for Adakon that spawns soon, which would be super easy to take with the amount of consistent damage we have in our team composition. Now this is where you can tell that this team didn't plan the sequence out of base because they weren't aligned with the play they could make. As mentioned, we could go top side for the 2 towers, but we also could go bot side for Adakon. Either way, we do the same one all together, we play between the lanes and we put vision on that side. Here's the problem though, Milia goes up, Vi goes down, and because of that, nothing happens. We end up just stalling out, and then we all just randomly get bored and take resets after only being on the map for 1 minute, and all of our top sides and vision goes, and now the enemy has access to a play they shouldn't have. Right? In hindsight, either of these plays works. If we all go bot side, we could go deep in the jungle with vision and just take Atacama pretty easily with all the damage we have. But on the counter argument, if our Vi went top with Milio here, take a look at this moment with all of the plays we have available. Rumble showing on vision bot lane, the enemy's walking in and contesting us when they don't have vision in their own top jungle. So we could pick them in the jungle when they face check, or we could easily move in for this top tier 2. We saw 3 enemies mid, we see 1 enemy bot, we would have access to the top tower with the wave still alive, we could rush it down. All of these plays would work. We just did 2 at the same time, which obviously shows bad sequence planning on their part. To further demonstrate sequence planning, let's jump back in time and switch teams to become the red team this time so that we can plan a sequence from a losing position. So we've just finished up a sequence, we've got a ton of money and we're finishing off this tower and we're doing a pretty nice synchronized recall and all coming out of base together now. Let's plan out this next sequence and see what we should do. So the first question is, what do we play for? Well, if we look over here, Dragon's coming up in 1 minute. So that means that the next objective is Dragon. Okay, that's the good first question, but the second question, can we fight it? Okay, let's take stock of everything. So our Rumble just got dive top lane, and they took the top tower with Herald. Alright, let's take stock. We're down 3,000 gold. It's gonna make it hard. That's okay, what ultimates do we have? Okay, we got a pretty ulti-reliant comp. No Rumble ult, no Maokai ult. Oh, this is not looking good. We're down our 2 major ultimates that we need for the fight, and we're down 3k gold, and we're going to be late to the objective because our Rumble's still dead for 35 seconds. Can we win the fight? No, we can't. So what we should do is opt to trade. If we go to Dragon, we all die. So why would we go to Dragon? Let's opt to trade, which means we now do our sequence onto top side, because again, there are 2 options in this sequence. There are towers top side, there is objective bot side. If we predict our opponent will go bot side, which it's easy to predict what they will do, the towers aren't a factor since they're even and the objective's bot side, so they should go bot side out of base. We can go to the opposite side and trade onto the towers since we can't contest on the objective. Things get a lot more complicated once you actually get onto the map, but that's for a different video. At a minimum, aligning with your team as to what to play for and where to get vision is already a huge benefit, opposed to a team who is just lost and deploying onto both sides of the map, like the blue team did in our example. So plan your sequences out of base, find where the next objective is, ask if you want to contest it, and then play as a team, deploying the majority of your teammates towards the same side so that you're unified. Thanks heaps for watching the video. If you're interested, I have full session recordings over on my Patreon, including sessions with pro teams and amateur level teams as well. So if you want to get even more prepared for Clash, you can either book in a team session with me or watch some of those recordings. The link to do both will be in the video description. And as always, have a great day everyone.